Hello again. Today I want to tell you in detail about the Maestro plugin. We at Stereo 7 were inspired by the sound of this atmospheric Soviet synthesizer and decided to make a digital version of it, so that everyone could seem to return to those times and immerse listeners in the atmosphere of vintage and cozy sound. In this video we will use the Maestro plugin as the main one, also Melodyne, in order to show how vibrato works, and FabFilter Pro Q3 to show frequencies and how the high-pass filter and resonance works. Behind the scenes, I wrote a small track, using which we will dive into this lesson as an example. Maestro is a virtual library for Native Instruments Kontakt. This is a library based on the similarly named Soviet synthesizer, as you already know. It greets us with a very simple, but at the same time functionally useful interface. The first thing you should pay attention to is the library of tools, roughly speaking presets, which were created in advance for us by the developer. We can click on any of the presets, let's say Piano 2, then by clicking on the MIDI keyboard, or by clicking the mouse here on the keys. Each preset from this list emulates a particular instrument. Here we can see such names as clarinet or flute. We can say that these are more electronic and vintage sounds, created based on the timbres of real musical instruments. Let's take piano, for example, and here we can hear that this instrument, in terms of timbre and sound character, is really similar to some kind of electronic piano. Depending on your genre or the track you're writing at the moment, you can pick up any of these instruments. This instrument, for example, can easily be suitable for a leading melody. Or we can choose some denser sound and make it into a pad for the background or write down a chord sequence. So, everything is clear with the tools. I suggest moving on to the set of parameters and knobs that are presented in the plugin. The first thing we see is the high-pass filter. So now we play a note, and then we turn the filter and we can hear what's happening. High frequencies disappear from the instrument. This can be demonstrated more clearly by opening any equalizer. In our case it is FabFilter Pro Q3. Here is an instrument without a filter and we see its range. The instrument plays in the upper middle and it has quite a few high frequencies. Let's see what happens as we move the filter knob. Roughly speaking, this parameter cuts off this entire spectrum and, depending on what task you are facing, we can actively use this parameter to create one effect or another. For example, most likely you heard in some tracks the melody floating at the beginning, as if it was first underwater, and then slowly and smoothly increases and turns into a full-fledged and rocking track. Let's look at how to do this using this library and this parameter. Let's say we wrote a song with such an atmospheric intro. So, I like everything, but I want to make this intro that plays at the beginning flow out more smoothly, so that it is not immediately obvious what kind of melody we have and what colors it will give in the main part of the track. We can apply the considered filter and do automation. How to do it? In Ableton, this is quite simple, although it may not be so obvious the first time. We go to Kontakt, to the Automation tab and click this triangle on the plugin, then the Configure button. You can take any of the numbers that are presented by holding down the left mouse button and drag it to the parameter that we want to automate. In our case, we want to work with a filter, drag it. We see that a filter has appeared here, after which we can deactivate the Configure button and turn the parameter. When I move the slider here, the position of the filter in the plugin also changes. Now we can do the swim out. To do this, as for any other automation in Ableton, we right-click and the Show Automatization button. Here we see a visual display of the filter's action, and by moving the slider we change it. When the band on the track below we can't hear the instrument at all, it cuts off all frequencies. We raise, all frequencies are in place, and we want the frequencies to appear very smoothly. To do this, We create 2 points, one at the end, the other at the beginning, and shift the starting point about halfway so that we can hear the instrument a little, but not its entire range, and thus the entire spectrum is slowly opening up. So with filter and automation, which you can do in any sequencer, be it FL Studio, Ableton, or something else, we've made our intro even smoother. Now, when playing our track, we will see that the filter knob is spinning without our participation. The next parameter we'll look at is chorus. This is a fairly simple parameter that adds voices to our instrument. This is how the melody sounds without chorus. In our case, using chorus we make the instrument wider, more voluminous, and more atmospheric. Let's twist the parameter and clearly see what exactly is happening. Let's listen to the entire track without chorus. And turn the parameter up to full. The instrument now stands out more. Without the chorus he gets quite lost, you can't hear him. The track began to sound much more atmospheric. It's important not to go to extreme settings to avoid turning everything into an overly chaotic sounding chaos. We can also automate the chorus, make it larger in some places, smaller in others. This can be very useful for detailed sound design. And the next parameter that we see is called reso, or completely resonance. We hear the piano in our track, which already sounds quite atmospheric with the chorus, but something is missing, as if it is still a little lost. We see that the instrument sounds in the low middle, high middle, but here it's a little empty. When this happens, the resonance parameter helps us. Let's raise it slowly and see what happens on the equalization wave. When there was no resonance, there was an obvious hole in this range, and when we raised the resonance over the entire spectrum it became almost even more sandy. High frequencies were added and the instrument in the mix sounded brighter and more readable. And the next parameter is release. It is responsible for how long after we release the key the sound will continue to play. For example, let's add another tool from the Maestro library in order to consider this parameter. Let's write short notes. We see that when they end up in the piano roll, in reality they continue to play. That is, they still have a so-called tail. The release parameter is responsible for the length of this tail. If we remove it, we can hear what happened. The sounds became very abrupt, such as are usually used for bass. Let's say we lower the instrument by 2 octaves and it becomes like a short 808 bass. And, the greater the release, the longer the tail of the instrument. To make it clearer, I will copy the tool twice. And, on the first one I will make release maximum, on the second, minimum. After which we can save these tracks from MIDI clips into audio signals, freeze each of them, press the freeze track button on each and flatten track. Okay, let's turn it up a little so that the audio signal can be seen graphically. Now we visually see the very tail we are talking about. The first one is quite long, and the second one is very short. It is important to understand that different release parameters are used for different genres and different tunes. If we are writing something electronic, 8-bit, for example, a soundtrack for a Mario game, then we use a short release, because the sounds are abrupt. If we write something more lyrical, sad, atmospheric, when we need to calm the listener, we make the tail longer and achieve the desired effect. The last effect we'll look at is vibrato. Vibrato is a dynamic change in pitch as it plays. Now I'm raising the level of our vibrato, but nothing changes. Vibrato has 2 parameters, the overall level and the frequency with which the effect will oscillate. This may be quite difficult to understand in words, but visually it will be much clearer. So let me raise the frequency and we will listen to what happens to the melody. We hear the instrument begin to float a little. When we set the maximum parameter, it begins to seem to shake from fear or inspiration. To better understand how vibrato works, we'll add another instrument with a fairly long sound, like Violin II. Yes, it sounds great. Let's write a little melody. Okay, that's enough for the example. Vibrato is now at 0. Raise the level and frequency a little and listen. Yes, okay, we hear the effect quite clearly. We'll record the part we have in Melodyne. And, look, here we have waves graphically displayed. This is exactly the action of vibrato. Now we have set quite large values for level and frequency, but if we make them maximal at all, we will see that these waves will become several times more frequent. So, we have such a wriggling snake that does not go beyond the limits of the note, but within the limits of this note it oscillates and does this as often as possible. Sounds like some kind of game sound, doesn't it? By the way, using the Maestro synthesizer we don't always have to twist vibrato with our hands. There are several other versions of the synthesizer with additional effects. Here, not just vibrato is used on the library, but so-called slides. And the note here not only runs within its frequency range, but moves over a certain interval. By properly processing such sound, we can get quite interesting effects in our works. In order to write a simple melody using version 1.8 is enough. And in order to color the track, you can use other versions. Now that we understand which parameters are responsible for what in the synthesizer, we can use it to its full potential in order to create cool tracks and spice them up with interesting effects. Thanks for watching, see you in the next episodes.